We are starting our new unit, Unit 8. Lesson 1 is going to be about the second industrial revolution. We talked previously about the industrial revolution that takes place in the United States from about 1800 until 1830, 1840. But what's going to happen after the Civil War is over is we're going to see another emergence of massive industrialization in the United States. So the second industrial revolution takes place from 1865 to 1914. So our major lesson objectives today, we're going to be able to explain the reasons for this increase in industrial production. We're also going to see a large spike in immigration in the United States. And then lastly, determine why there were certain people that were able to get extremely wealthy during this time period. And that will lead us into lesson 2 of this unit as well. So we see a major period of rapid growth after the Civil War. This is fueled by the existence of major natural resources in the United States like coal, iron ore, copper, lead, oil, and timber. Timber is lumber, like trees. There's also a major large workforce, which becomes even larger because of immigration. So between 1860 and 1900, the United States population grows from 31 million to 80 million. So this is going to lead to a large labor force. There's also a large amount of people that are willing to invest in industry. So that is capital. When you hear about capital or investment money, that's what we're referring to there. So during this time, there's also lots of inventions that are developed. The greatest inventor of the age is Thomas Edison. He invents the electric light bulb. And then he also invents the phonograph. The phonograph plays music, but the electric light really revolutionizes society. The fact that now we're able to light the night basically and have the ability to have, light much longer and not just relying on daylight. Edison also invents several other things. He invents the stock ticker, okay, that helps to read out the stocks. He invents a generator to help harness the power of electricity, a microphone, and he's also one of the first person that revolutionizes the idea of motion pictures. So, movies, films, okay. During this time period, we'll also see the expansion of free enterprise. In the United States, businesses are privately owned, which means they're owned by one person, and they operate in competition with one another. The government very rarely interferes with business, and that allows the United States to become a capitalist economy. How businesses work typically is in the form of corporations. So, a business sells shares of stock to stockholders, and you need basically that capital, that financial investment to come from many sources. If a corporation that you buy a stock to fails, you lose only the money that you've invested. So, if I buy stocks for a company and I buy 100 stocks, and the company fails, those 100 stocks, that's all that I lose. But if a corporation is successful and it grows, you get a portion of the profits. What we see during this time period also, and this is a big thing on your notes, is improvement in transportation. We have railroads that continue to develop. We have trunk lines developed, which tie all smaller lines together. We have the New York Central system, and the railroads expand and become very important over time. So, what happens as a result of that is we develop time zones. Time zones make railroad schedules easier to follow. Um, we also have the need to improve the safety of railroads. George Westinghouse invents the air brake, and this greatly improves train safety so we don't see the death and destruction that happened in the early days of the railroads. So this leads to a new business development. Being on the railroad became a very popular thing. Pullman invents comfortable sleeping and dining cars. Up until World War II, railroads are very, very popular, but now it's not as common to choose to ride on the railroad. Obviously, prior to World War II, it was not common to use airplanes to travel places. So eventually, railroads will be um, replaced by airplane travel, but you still can take a railroad. Locally, you can also take it across the country today. We also start to see during this time period the development of cars. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, we begin to see primitive autos developed. Um, Originally, these were laughed at. It was only something for the rich. In the early 1900s, cars were extremely expensive. So it was kind of a luxury item that only people that were like wicked wealthy would have access to. But that's going to change with Henry Ford. Henry Ford develops the Model T in 1908. So eventually, the Model T could be purchased for only $350, which, if you saw in the previous video, originally cars were getting sold for $2,000 to $5,000, which is not something people had. The first car, the Model T that you see in the picture here, came in any color as long as it's black. So Henry Ford helps to make the car more able to be purchased by people. We also see during this time period the development of airplane travel. So Orville and Wilbur Wright own a bike shop in Dayton, Ohio, and they decide to try to figure out how to make that bike fly. So the first successful flight in Kitty Hawk 1903, the Wright brothers are the first to kind of develop airplane travel. We also have massive improvements in communication. We have a telegraph, which we learned about the telegraph, you looked at the telegraph, but now for the first time ever, we successfully lay a cable across the Atlantic. So now we can communicate from different continents, from the United States to Europe. Um, Alexander Graham Bell also uses the technology of the telegraph to develop the telephone. He perfects the first primitive telephone. New York and San Francisco are linked by long distance by 1915. So the telephone, now we can communicate by voice across large distances. This was a huge development. Obviously, there's going to be some early issues with all of the cords and the cables, like you can see in these pictures here. We also had operators who had to, connect one place to another. So there would definitely be some kinks that had to be worked out. But if you can imagine today, right, we all have our cell phone in our hands that use wireless technology. The telephone was not that. The telephone needed wires, and it would take some getting used to, so to say. Um, in 1895, Guglielmo Marconi develops the wireless radio, and it uses radio waves to transmit sounds across the air without wires. So the radio will become, again, another popular form of entertainment, and it will form, radio stations that people will listen to tune in to hear sports, to hear the news, to hear shows. And later into the more 1900s, we'll talk about this later, is the development of television that will basically take similar technology to the radio and bring moving pictures into people's homes. Mass production also is created at this time. We have standardized parts. You can see here, this is an assembly line where they're building a car that was originally developed by Henry Ford. It puts everything together at a steady pace. And this created a division of labor. So with this mass production, things could be made a lot easier. It reduces the costs of things and reduces the cost of manufacturing. During this time, we also start to see the development of merchandising and advertising. We have specialty stores where stores kind of focus on selling one thing. But then we also see the development of department stores where everything is in one huge store. So think, most of these stores, Wanamaker's, Macy's, Marshall Fields, these places, Macy's, don't exist anymore. Well, Macy's still exists, but if you think about a store that has everything in one huge store, this was definitely a development. Then we also had the development of chain stores where one company owns stores in many different towns. the A&P, Woolworths. Chains are very common today. Think of like CVS, Walgreens, Target. Those are all chains, but this was a new idea at the time. There were also mail order houses, which, were catalogs that were sent to people's house and they could order just about anything from the catalog. Okay, so that kind of concludes our lesson about the Second Industrial Revolution. Don't forget to do the assignment. You have an ed puzzle as well as this, and you have your notes and your mastery check.